Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today for this conversation about the play Red, which opens at the Rep tonight, as Skip was mentioning. It is the first time we've been here on opening night. We're glad to do that. The actors were looking for a little distraction, and here they are. But the thing that makes our conversation about Red special is that we're joined by Todd Herman, the executive director of our Arkansas Arts Center. And what makes the production of Red even more special than any regular opening night is the opportunity, in this instance, to partner with the Arts Center on this production. What better opportunity when you're doing a play about one of the foremost American painters, Mark Rothko, to partner with the Arts Center. So we'll take some time today to talk about how that partnership came about and how it really enhances the experience of seeing theater and seeing art for everybody here in Central Arkansas. And I just introduced Todd, so I don't know if I need to make him reintroduce himself. Todd, we're very glad. Good. But let me ask our other two actors to introduce themselves and tell you where they're from and what they're doing in this production.
Hi, I'm Joseph Graves, and I'm playing Mark Rothko in this production, and this is my 11th show with the Arkansas Repertory Theatre since Bob has been here. And I live in Beijing, China, and run a theater company there. And I grew up in Arkansas, so it's kind of like coming home when I come here.
My name is Chris Windelkin. This is my first time in Arkansas, first time working at the Rep. I'm born and raised in New York, and I went to school in New York at NYU, and now I live in Los Angeles, and I'm kind of back and forth between LA and New York, and I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. I know, go ahead. We get a lot of fascinating actors here, but very few of them begin their sentence by saying, I live in Beijing. We have a video that Angel Galloway, our Director of Communications, has put together, and I think we want to roll that video as a little introduction, and then we'll get going. I had the opportunity to see Red in New York 3 or 4 years ago, and to see Rothko come alive on stage and to see the power of the playwright's work creating the relationship between Rothko and his assistant, the vibrancy, the immediacy, it was a riveting performance. And I knew that it was something that sooner or later I wanted to create on our stage here in Little Rock for our audiences. You know, we may not be immediately familiar with the work of Mark Rothko, but we are certainly aware that Rothko changed the face of American painting. And when you get to see this man brought to life on stage in Red, you really come to understand the struggles, the challenges, the sort of, you know, what it means to be a creative genius and at the same time tortured by your own legacy. Well, you know, one of the things that really attracted me to Red was how well written it was, that it's just a riveting roller coaster story. And our playwright, John Logan, is not a household name as a playwright. But if you've seen the film The Aviator, if you've seen Hugo, Gladiator, or Skyfall, he's the screenwriter for those films. And so it's surprising to me and kind of cool that this really well-known screenwriter has also written for the stage. It's very popular to use the phrase anti-hero right now because we've seen it so much with TV shows like Breaking Bad and House of Cards. We've seen it in the TV show Mad Men, which kind of parallels the time period of Red. And really what we're getting at there is we meet a character who exhibits personality traits or engages in activities that we wouldn't necessarily engage in our own life, that we might find objectionable perhaps. But yet, as we get to know these characters, as we get beyond their surface actions and their perhaps gruff personalities, we come to understand that there's something deeper going on, that there is something that they're striving for that may be just beyond their grasp or just beyond our grasp. And we may not agree necessarily with how they go about achieving those ends, but we come to respect and even admire the attempt. We find ourselves coming to understand and to justify the means they employ to the ends they achieve. I think there's something particularly postmodern to have a video up there while I'm standing here. But be that as it may. Not to mention egomaniacal. Well, there you go. Either or. As I mentioned on the video, I saw Red when it ran on Broadway, and it won 6 Tony Awards, and I knew enough about Mark Rothko to be interested in the production. But I wasn't expecting and wasn't prepared for the power of the play, and that the story transcends being a biodrama and really focuses on the relationship. And the character of Ken is so interesting because the play is based on a true story, but the character of Ken is a fictional character. But yet it's really, I think, at the end of the day, it's a play about Ken, because Ken's the one who grows. We have a lot of conversation about who's the protagonist and who's the antagonist in the play Red. And a director and a cast can go in different directions. But it is a fascinating play that captured me for so many reasons, not just about the story of Rothko, but it is the story of Rothko that brings us to the table. And so I wonder if wouldn't mind if Todd would take a few moments just to give us a sort of a little biographical sketch about Mark Rothko.
Gosh, a little biographical sketch of Mark Rothko. He is incredibly complicated and complex as an artist. Many of you probably know his work. I mean, you've seen some of it now on the screen, as one of the first generation of the abstract expressionists. What the exhibition at the Arkansas Arts Center does is it explores that decade of the 1940s when he becomes an abstract expressionist. So in the 1920s and 1930s, he is a figure painter. And by the end of the 40s, he kind of blossoms into this whole new realm of American art, which is abstract expressionism. And it's kind of that story, that journey that he goes through in those 10 years that's told in the exhibition at the Art Center. But to kind of go back a little bit further and give you a biographical sketch of Rothko, he was born in Russia into a fairly well-to-do Jewish family, but suffering some oppression there. The family moved to Portland, Oregon. Not always a destination in the 19-teens for an aspiring young artist, but he wasn't one then. He did not have aspirations to be an artist. But I think his early upbringing, not only in Russia, but then going to Portland, where he graduated high school within 3 years and claimed it to be extremely easy. He got a scholarship to Yale. He was at Yale for 2 years, but didn't graduate. But the 2 years that he was there, he felt very acutely a kind of isolationism, because at that time, again, we're talking 1920s, at an Ivy League school, and being not of Western Jewish descent, but Eastern Jewish descent, there was a bit more than the average anti-Semitism toward him. And so he felt this kind of social injustice and isolation and being alone. And one of his friends called him the loneliest man he'd ever met. And that kind of plays out throughout his career. And with World War II, what he tries to achieve in his art, and I think I'm going into my actual slide presentation at this point, anyway, his art is trying to kind of solve this problem of man's isolationism and trying to find a unity for all of us, a language that we can all relate to. So he, at the end of the 1940s, he blossoms into this great abstract expressionist artist. He dies in February of 1970. He commits suicide, and we can kind of talk about that later if anybody wants to talk about that, but it's very complex.
And I know you'll color in a lot of those without having to go into the slideshow, which we'll do in just a few minutes, because Todd has prepared a very excellent slideshow that features some of the work you'll see at the exhibit at the Art Center, but also gives you sort of an historical context of the evolution of Rothko's work. Before we get into that, and you mentioned that he didn't come to America. He came to America, I guess, when he was 10. And in his early years, he didn't aspire to be an artist. He aspired to be other things. And one of the things he aspired to be was an actor. Rothko actually, started out thinking maybe he would be an actor. And there's a story that's told about Rothko in his younger years when he was doing some community theater on the West Coast. He always bragged that in one play he was in, he had a teenage understudy. That teenage understudy's name was Clark Gable. So he always thought that he was a better actor than Clark Gable, and he took some pride in that. Let me turn the question to Joe. Joe, this is as you mentioned, your 11th production at Arkansas Rep. And I bet a lot of you have seen Joe's previous work. I think Othello was the first play you did here where he played Iago, but All the King's Men, All My Sons, The Tempest, Moonlight and Magnolias, Sherlock Holmes, Of Mice and Men. Yes, if you want to see a picture of Mice and Men, there's a picture of Joe hanging in the men's bathroom on the first floor of the Rep, of Joe in Of Mice and Men.
That's the kind of respect Bob has for me. And that's a picture of Joe. We'll put it in the bathroom.
Well, it's a popular place. So Joe is well recognized at the Rep. And you saw up there, when you saw the picture of Joe and Mark Rothko side by side, how remarkably they look like each other. And Joe, it's not his real hair. I mean, he has hair. Joe, talk a little bit about creating this icon. What challenges do you run into when you're playing somebody that's a real-life, famous, well-known person?
Well, for me, the challenges are pretty much the same as any other theatrical role. Unlike working in a television show or a film where you develop some kind of a character and then find a way to make the language fit with a play, it is always of paramount importance, particularly with a beautifully written play, which we have, to have the character evolve from what the author says, because our whole purpose is to express this piece that he has. So research and that kind of thing, although I did quite a bit of it, is never very helpful to me in a play, because it's all about this language and the emotions that are being expressed through the words. And so I didn't, and I don't, when I'm playing a biographical character on stage, approach it much different than I would any other theatrical character.
Now, you've played this role before. You played this role, Mark Rothko, in Red at Syracuse Stage 2 years ago.
Right, in Syracuse, New York. And so I had a little bit of a head start on it, in that we did it before, and it was really well received in Syracuse, which is surprisingly a town, city about the size of Little Rock, and very similar.
The play has been done after its Broadway run. It has had an incredibly successful run in cities across the country. Now, that's two reasons. One, because the play did so well in New York, and because it is what we call a two-hander. It's a two-character play, which makes it, in the grand scheme of producing theater, very economical to produce. So it's being done in a lot of regional theater. So it's kind of like one of those win-wins you don't get very often as a producer. You get a character play that's really well done, that's fascinating to see, and it's economical to produce. So it's being done all over the country. And in fact, Arena Stage in Washington, D.C., one of our nation's flagship nonprofit theaters, just announced that its production of Red was the highest grossing non-musical in the history of Arena Stage, which has been around since the 50s. So it's fascinating that this play about Mark Rothko really finds resonance all over the country. Chris, let me turn to you. Your character, Ken, is not based in historic act. Rothko had a number of assistants, and if you see the play, it's Rothko. Well, I'll get into the biography a little bit, but the play does take place. The setting is accurate. It's true. It takes place in 1958 and 59, when Mark Rothko was hired by Philip Johnson and Mies van der Rohe, who were in the process of designing and building the Seagram's Building in Manhattan, a landmark modernist building in Midtown. They wanted the best artist in the world to create the artwork for their new Four Seasons restaurant. And they hired Mark Rothko. And that's what the play is about. Rothko rented a YMCA on the Bowery in Manhattan, 222 Bowery. And interestingly, I worked in New York City for 15 years at 330 Bowery. So I was just up the street about 10 years later. So Rothko created the studio in this YMCA, big, tall ceilings. And when you come see the play at the Rep, the set design by Mike Nichols replicates that studio that he created. I mean, obviously it's much smaller, but it's based on the layout and look of that gymnasium, which you can still walk by today. But in that mix, the character of Ken is a fictionalized character, but yet the character of Ken goes through tremendous change in the play. The play takes place just in that short span of time when he was working on this commission. What process do you bring? What's your approach to a character like this, Chris?
Well, I think what you said is true. There's you see a lot of growth with Ken. Ken is a fictionalized character, and it's really neat for me. You get to see this guy grow kind of from his first day at work, a job interview, to ultimately becoming kind of a confidant with Rothko, and they grow together and they learn about each other and they kind of bring about different colors in each other. As Joe said, the play is really beautifully written, and I think there is actually a really wonderful economy of language. There's an economy of scenes and structure. The play is in 5 scenes, and it feels like every line and every scene is exactly what's necessary. So I feel like there's a kind of beautiful structure for my character that's inherent in the play, these 5 different parts of kind of beginning work, becoming a little closer with this guy, learning to kind of, the student really learns to challenge the master a little bit, and then they kind of have a break and you see where things go from there. So it's a very neat experience for me as an actor to kind of have this structure inherently built into the character I'm playing.
This play is 90 minutes long, doesn't have an intermission. These guys never leave the stage for 90 minutes. Is that challenging for an actor, or is that easier? Would you rather work that way? Either one of you. What does it mean to have to be up there and be under those lights for 90 minutes?
Well, for me, it's great because it just sort of propels you into these moments. I mean, the play takes place over the course of 2 years, but for us, it's 90 minutes in real time. So we're finding these moments over the course of a 2-year relationship in 90 minutes and in 5 pieces. So we have the opportunity to really throw ourselves into these moments very quickly, and there's a really quick turnaround. And I think for me it's very helpful. You kind of capitalize on some momentum that you build, I find, from scene to scene. And scene 3 throws you right into scene 4, which throws you right into the finale of the play in scene 5.
That is the take of a younger actor. I prefer a play where I kind of come in at the end and make a few speeches and then go away. No, it does help you as an actor to be out constantly engaged with each other, and particularly in a play that is so intimately involved with 2 people. 2 characters. And I want to let all of you know, and you will when you come to see it and when you invite other people to come to see it, that even though it seems a sort of esoteric piece dealing with an abstract expressionist artist that you may not be very familiar with, it is really a very human piece, and this relationship between a mentor and an unwilling mentor, really, Rothko was, and his young assistant. And it's also very funny. There's a lot of humor in the play that arises not out of joke telling, but in the same way that you get to know characters in your family or your friends, and they react the same way, and you laugh because they're doing the same silly things that they always do. It's that kind of humor that's very believable and very touching in the play.
You know, you heard on the video, John Logan, our playwright, is more well known for his screenplays. And it's exceptional that he's been so lucky to write such accomplished, commercially successful screenplays. And Joe is a screenwriter too, so I think he knows what I'm talking about here, that it's much more lucrative to write screenplays than it is to write plays for the stage. And increasingly, new plays are written by screenwriters, by people who have more experience writing television sitcoms, or writing for our premium cable channels, or for writing for film. And we see, you know, the movement back and forth. And what you get in playwriting today, frequently, is what we call episodic or cinematographic plays. Plays that span huge passages of time and space and location, where then the set designer and the director are constantly challenged to create cohesion, particularly when you're on one small stage with a limited budget. So you see what I'm saying? As opposed to you know, a play like All My Sons, which takes place in a backyard of the Keller house, and the scenes evolve from that, or Glass Menagerie that takes place in the living room. Today, plays often span great chunks of time and space, and it drives directors and set designers crazy to try to you know, say, well, this was written by a screenwriter who's got editing and unlimited budgets. But the good thing I'll say about John Logan, even though the play does take place over 2 years, it all takes place in Rothko's studio, and it makes, as a director, it's a real treasure to work on, because the scenes flow easily one into the other, and there's not this great gulf from one scene to the next, or all of this connective tissue that they expect you to supply through set design and lighting design and costume changes. And so this play, in that way, as Joe was saying, this economy of scale is really something that's unique about the structure of Red in the context of new plays today. I think this would be a good time to now turn the microphone back to Todd, and we've talked a little bit about the play and about creating the play, but let's talk, you know, one of the neat thing, the reason we're doing Red at the Rep is because of the Art Center's exhibit about Mark Rothko, the 1940s, the Decisive Decade. Because we're all about creating unique experiences, one-of-a-kind experiences. Well, how more unique and one-of-a-kind can you get when you can do a play that stands on its own as a great play, but then bring to life the artist's work, the context. And so, obviously, this is the exhibit is something that Todd has created, and that created before you came to Arkansas, something you're working on when you were back east. And how lucky are we that Todd came here and then also arranged for his exhibit of Rothko's work to come to the Art Center. And so it gives us the opportunity, for instance, during the run of the show, on 3 nights, Todd and I and the cast will be up in Foster's. The show, just because it is only 90 minutes, at either 8:30 or 9:30, depending on when you come, we'll be up in the bar, where we'll spend so many nights, talking about the play. So if you have questions, or you want to give us feedback, tell us what you liked, didn't like, whatever, come up to Foster's and join us for a conversation about Rothko and about the play. On 2 nights, we have 2 different artists, David Bell and Matt McLeod, will be painting in Foster's before the show, and then talking about what it means to be a painter and creating work. So that's 2 different nights you can come down and see Matt or see David creating work. So we're trying to create these rich experiences. You can use your rep ticket to get a discount to the Decisive Decade, or you can use your ticket to the Decisive Decade to get a discount to your ticket at the rep. So these are the kind of wonderful collaborative opportunities that we really want to take advantage of. And it's been so informative for us to learn from Todd about Rothko, and so he's going to take us through sort of like a little history of Rothko and the exhibit that you're going to see at the Art Center.
Right, so this is the exhibition, and if I'm doing this correctly, there we go. So here is Mark Rothko, obviously on the left, and a work on the right. And what I want to draw your attention to here are basically 2 things. One is that this is what we would call the mature work of Mark Rothko, the type of work that most people know and associate with him. And also, I want you to notice the scale, because the scale of these paintings is very important to Mark Rothko, and I'm going to explain that kind of as we go through these slides. But this is an image of Mark Rothko's work in the late 1930s. So something very different. And what he's looking at here is something that's common to American artists in the 1930s, and that is the idea of isolationism as part of modern society. So if you look at artists like Edward Hopper was painting the same thing, people alone. They might be in groups, but they're not conversing with one another. There is this kind of aloofness that is part of the modern American world. This is modernity, is being alone, being separate. Gone are the days when you knew every single person in your town by name. Now most of the people you know are strangers when you meet them on the street. So this is kind of the new, this is from his Subway series. He's thinking in terms of modern America and being isolated. And what he moves into in the 1940s is a reading of Friedrich Nietzsche. So we're not going to get into that because it's far too much for any of us to handle at lunchtime. But what he reads in the 1920s is Nietzsche's The Birth of Tragedy. And to kind of sum it all up is that what Nietzsche is looking for and what Rothko tries to employ is the idea of tragedy, that life is tragic. And this is the tragedy. The tragedy is that we're alone, that we are isolated from one another, that modern society has made us this way. This is our tragic being. And he wants to create an art that addresses that, but in addition addresses what Nietzsche and Rothko eventually see as the duality of all mankind. And that what each of us has is this kind of fighting contrast of the inevitability of our death and our enduring will to live and to survive. And that's what we all share. So the art that he wants to create addresses those two basic concepts and is universal. So it's not only universal between all of us in this room, everyone in America, from America to China, but people throughout all time. That was what bound us and binds us all together. And that's what he's trying to find in art, because it's through delving into these commonalities that he can, in his mind, produce a kind of art that will help cure mankind of what he's seeing happen in World War II. Right? Why are we doing these things to ourselves? Obviously, if he can create an art that inspires us at our deepest level, we can be cured of what we're doing. And that's what he's trying to achieve. He's not the only one doing this. So on the right, you have a mature work by Mark Rothko, which is in the exhibition. And on the left is Jackson Pollock, right? So at the end of the 1940s, Pollock and Rothko kind of emerge in their own very individual signature styles. But in the 40s, they're both working in a similar vein. This is Rothko on the right and Jackson Pollock on the left. Both working in very much a surrealist type of mode. This is Mark Rothko early in the 1940s. So when he's trying to develop the tragic, he's trying to identify the tragic, he goes to or looks to Greek tragedy. Because if you read Greek tragedy, the name implies it, it's tragic. Those Greek tragedies, they end badly. At least one person dies, usually more than that. They're usually in some kind of complex intermarriage relationship, whatever it is. But it's terrible. And that is, he's trying to capture that kind of universal tragic aspect that he finds in Greek tragedy. And in this case, in this painting, so we have sort of a Greek chorus up here, but we also have a separation of kind of a human form up here and then animal legs down here. And that represents a common feature in Greek mythology, which is the centaur, which is half human, half beast, which represents the intellect, the human side, and our more kind of wild, bestial side, which, again, the Greeks and now Rothko are seeing as those two complex parts of all of us, that all of us have the rational and the irrational. And that's our battle, is the balance between the rational and the irrational. So he's making it kind of writ large here in this painting. The problem with these early paintings is the language that he's creating, his expectation is everyone will understand it, because we're all tied by this tragic kind of understanding. We all get it. No, people didn't get it. You know, they saw these paintings, they said, well, they're lovely, and part of it, that was part of his problem, is he was trying to convey tragedy, but the paintings were too beautiful. You know, so he was trying to tell you, this is depressing, this is tragedy, and yet they're lovely to look at. So that was part of his problem early on. Here is another painting from that early period. One thing I will draw your attention to in both of these is you can start to see, you know, kind of horizontal divisions are part of his work from the earliest part in the 1940s. Eventually what he'll do is he'll lose the narrative elements and allow those background, the purity. You know, what he wants is pure art. He'll allow that purity to come forward and be everything and represent everything. So one of the influences that helps him get to that next level is surrealism. And many surrealist artists came to New York in the 1940s, escaping the war in Europe. And on the left you have, on the left you have André Masson, and on the right you have Joan Miro. When we think of surrealism, many people think about Salvador Dali, okay? And Dali's form of surrealism is really derived by Freud, where Dali is representing individual dreamscapes, okay? So that the representation of my dreamscape and my relationship with my father and my mother is going to be different from yours. It's going to be different from yours and Bob's, and all of ours are going to be different. They're individual, based on our own experiences. Carl Jung, who was a student of Freud, said, well, we need to go one level deeper. And if we go one level deeper, we're going to find those commonalities in all of us, all of our shared experiences. And that's what he called the collective unconscious. That if we go deep enough, there are these basic elements that have been there from the beginning of time. And that's, if we can tap into that, then you can create a language that everyone knows and everyone understands. For the surrealists, like these two, and eventually Mark Rothko, this is from that period, they explore that through a process called automatism, which comes out of the idea of automatic writing, where you kind of just close your mind and let your hand just go. And in art, you would do the same thing. You would take a pencil or a brush and you would just let it wander, meander across the paper or the canvas. And what you're doing is you're allowing your subconscious mind to come up to the surface and to just kind of be. And whatever happens on the paper or the canvas, that is a language that can speak to everyone. And usually what that means are organic shapes, usually shapes that resemble aquatic forms. Because it was very common at this time to think about the ocean as your subconscious. So the sky is your conscious, the ocean and what's under the ocean is your subconscious. So all of those kind of amoeboid shapes that you would think about with kind of looking at you know, a little drop of water under a microscope. That's kind of what they're getting at here in a work like this. And they have titles like this is sea fantasy and there's aquatic drama. So what is Rothko trying to do in all of this? He's trying to find that language that we can all understand. He works in watercolor at this period. Again, his problem is the paintings are just too good looking. You know, he's trying to convey to you, this is your tragedy, you're going to die, we're all going to die. And then he puts up these paintings and everyone says, oh gosh, they're just so lovely. And that's part of what frustrated him so much toward the end of his life is what he was trying to communicate, which was so meaningful to him, you know, trying to help us all by creating an art that we can all understand and be inspired by, turned into a commodity. You know, people just said, oh, they're really beautiful, I want to buy it, how much is it? And put it over my sofa. And that was incredibly distressing to him because his message was being lost in the larger context of the marketplace. So you can see here, as we move through again these shapes, the horizontal bands, right? And when you go see the exhibition, look at these surfaces. He spends so much time applying layer after layer after layer of paint, scraping away, adding more. There is so much richness in these surfaces. This isn't something that's kind of slapped off really quickly, right? It takes a very, very, very long time for him to create these surfaces. Well, then he has a breakthrough moment when he meets Clifford Still, who's working on the West Coast, and he moves into this stage, which are called the multiforms. And here is where he's really coming to terms with that duality of all of us, the tragedy of death and our enduring will to live. And we all know, it's thinking about Rothko and his eventual suicide, one thing that people know about suicide is why it's so dramatic is because your body fights it. Your body wants to live. Your body will kind of jerk itself to be, to live. And that is this kind of fight, and he sees it as the fight between form and formlessness. Formlessness is energy, this drive and will to live, and form is this tragedy of death. And so he's trying to combine the two of them here in paintings. Eventually the forms become larger, they start to stack, until eventually they come to this shape, which is still the human body. So remember how the scale that I talked to you before and showed you before in that first slide? He intentionally has vertical paintings. He intentionally has them on a human scale. He intentionally asks that they be hung low so that they become mirrors for you. When you stand in front of it, it is a reflection of you and you are a reflection of the painting. He has, in his mind, he has achieved this embodiment of our eternal struggle, of every person's eternal struggle. And in the bands, you have kind of torso. He stacks the bands to replicate kind of an abstracted human form. So once he achieves this, he kind of keeps moving forward with this idea in a lot of different colors, some bright and cheerful, some pretty depressing. But when we get to the play, this is the Seagram building on the left, and this is the Four Seasons restaurant. And these, well, that's going to be hard to see because it's kind of bright in here, but these are some of the paintings that were created for that commission, which he was given the commission. I'm sure the play is about, the play is about many of his internal struggles. One of them was about this commission. Did he really want his work and his message in this setting? And he was paid $35,000 for the works, which, what a bargain, right? Dozens of paintings for $35,000. He eventually raised the money and paid it back and said, I'm not going to do it. I'm raising $35,000, here's your money back. I'm not putting my paintings in this setting. I think it's that kind of struggle with message versus kind of the commodification of art that he struggled with towards the end of his life.
And the cool part about the play, everything that you just heard Todd talk about, the sort of philosophical underpinnings of Rothko's work, are all brought to life in the play, and they're done so in a dramatic and funny and engaging way. And it's fascinating because I think everything in the play is, based on what I'm hearing from Todd, is very accurate. And you don't always get that in drama. Oftentimes a playwright will take great dramatic license and change facts and move things around to suit his or her purpose in terms of the dramatic storytelling. What Logan has been able to do is to take everything that Todd has just laid out in the story of Rothko's life and bring it in, crystallize it into 90 minutes on the stage in a way that really puts a spotlight on Rothko, who, we talk about this anti-hero. Mark Rothko is not necessarily somebody you want to go out and have a drink with. But you wouldn't lack for conversation. And yet we're compelled by his aspiration and the aspiration of the character of Ken, who wants to be just like him but doesn't, and who really points out where his shortcomings are in terms of what it means not only to be a great artist, but also to be a human being. Let's open up for questions and see what you guys would like to talk about with our actors, or with Todd here about the exhibit at the Art Center, or about the play itself. What can we talk to you about? Yes, and I know there'll be a mic come around, so we'll get the mic.
This is your second time to do this part. Did you make any changes? Did you evolve any in the characterization from when you performed this before and now?
Yes, Bob would say things to me, you didn't really do that before, did you? That's so stupid. Now, it's always different when you're working with a different director and different actors in a different setting. So the sort of the center point of Rothko remained the same from what I did before, but now I'm reacting with another actor playing Ken, with another director putting the whole thing together. So you like to think that all these things emerge from a collaborative effort. So I think there are some changes, but the sort of center of what Rothko is already written by Logan in the play. So a lot was the same, but there are considerable changes because of the nature of the process of working in theater together.
You know, a big factor in Rothko's life was music. He was a self-taught musician. He was a brilliant man. We should never underestimate the fact that this guy was really a genius on so many levels. And, you know, you could use that cliche, tortured genius, to describe Mark Rothko. Well, he taught himself to play several instruments. And he was passionate about classical music, quite romantic music, in fact, which almost fights against what he valued in his paintings. He really loved Mozart and Beethoven, and that plays a very prominent role in the play. Music, one of the third character, I think, in this play is the record player that he had in his studio. They are constantly putting on music, and Rothko is constantly motivated by music. The playwright doesn't really give you any direction about what he suggests some composers. But one of the things we had to explore in the rehearsal process is what music was appropriate for the mood that we were trying to capture. And you can imagine that you also have to be mindful that you don't work with music that competes with the human voice, because they're talking over a lot of that music. And so it really is sort of, you know, literally symphonic in terms of how you have to sort of blend and select the music. Our sound designer, Alan Branson, did a great job working to incorporate in the rehearsal process the music, for instance. And I don't even know what music that Joe used in his I don't think we used, except for Don Giovanni at the top, I don't think we're using anything that's the same. No. Don Giovanni was reportedly Rothko's favorite piece of music, and it plays for the first half hour as the audience is assembling. But there were plenty of times in rehearsal where I would turn to Joe. We'd be like, you know, well, this is not going well. And so, well, how did you do it in Syracuse? And of course, Joe would always tell us about how much better it was there. You know, one of the great, you know, a great director is a great thief. You know, directors steal from each other all the time, and shamelessly. There are other questions. There was one. I'll go here and then we'll come over to Chris. Yes, right there, and then we'll.
I don't know how to use it. I think I got confused on the duality, the form being death and formlessness life. Yes. Is that because maybe I thought about it a little more as death static, and that's why it's form?
Let's see. Basically, yes. That death is the kind of the pin in the wall. That's you know, we're all ending the same way. So that's the one thing that's unchangeable, right? And so that is the form. That is the thing that cannot be avoided. It is always there. And then the other thing, the other aspect is all of this, the energy that causes us to fight that all the time, to have this enduring will to survive and thrive, and that's at the heart of what he's trying to create, is to capture that. Because if he can capture that and reflect it back on us, we will understand ourselves better. I mean, there's still some of the later works from the 1960s, you'll see where color becomes the will to live. And if we go too far into Nietzsche, we start talking about the Apollonian and the Dionysian, but that's way too far down a road nobody wants to go down. There is color becomes the will to live, and the structure, the forms, the stacking, that is death. That is the kind of point in the wall. That is the form. And so he combines the two together in a way to kind of represent our universal struggle.
He says in the play, in some direct relation to this, and it is a direct quote from Rothko, I think, he's talking to Ken, the assistant, and he says, we try to capture the ephemeral, the miraculous, and put it onto canvas. But when we do, it's like an entomologist pinning a butterfly, it dies. And so I think that was one of his huge struggle too. When I capture the energy that is our spirituality, our life force, and I try to show it to you, in some sense, it always dies. And that was one of the reasons he wanted this movement in his paintings that he was able to achieve. And I've actually sat in the Tate Museum, and then in Beijing there was a big exhibition of Rothko's work at the Pace Museum. And if you do take the time with his work, it is astonishing what happens to you, because it does begin to move and pulsate and draw you into it, and it does seem to live.
You know, one of the cool things about creating theater is that the last time I was here up in this podium, I was talking about puppet sex. And so the opportunity to talk about Nietzsche and creating sex with puppets is really one of the rewards of my job. But Joe's right. The fascinating part of the play is that they capture these things we're talking about, the Apollonian and the Dionysian, are captured in this play in ways that really engage. That's what makes the play brilliant, I think. Chris, you had a question. Here comes a mic.
Before, during, or after color-filled painting, generally, like Helen Frankenthaler, and were they influenced by and?
Yes, Rothko was the kind of the generator of that whole color field movement. So abstract expressionism has a couple of arms. One of them is color field, and Mark Rothko was kind of the first and premier in that group. Then you have, there's gesturalism, which is represented by Jackson Pollock, but all of this is about kind of an overarching umbrella of abstract expressionism. But yes, Rothko was the first in color field.
Yes. Back in the corner back there, then I'll come over here.
Okay. This question is for Mr. Herman. I have read that your exhibit has appeared in a number of other cities. Have any of those cities taken advantage of an opportunity like this to have a presentation of the play?
Do you mean collaborate, have a local theater do Red? They did it at the very first venue, which was at the Columbia Museum of Art, which is where I started before I came here. So when I was putting this together, I was talking to the people there, and I said, there's this play called Red. You could probably, do that when we do the exhibition, which they did, but they did it actually at their at the museum. They have kind of a big open space, and they did it kind of like a black box theater sort of thing. But this is a far more kind of in-depth production. I think they only did 2 shows there, so this is kind of a full-scale version. But the other 2, Denver didn't do it, and Columbus didn't do it. Missed opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, particularly Denver, which has a vibrant theater community. Columbus has has some theater community, but Denver has a vibrant theater community, and of course, in hindsight, it would have been cool, of course, this is way before we even, to have done it as a unit, and sort of toured it around. It would have been very cool, I think. But that's next time, I guess. Yes?
I have a question for Mr. Herman again. I spent 24 years in Houston and a lot of time at the Rothko Chapel on the grounds of St. Thomas. And experienced there, I danced with the whirling dervishes. I went to funerals. It seemed to be an incredible backdrop for all sorts of celebrations and mournful things at the same time. Did he ever think that someone like Miss Lumberjay had ever collected the right pieces to express what he was trying to express in his horror of life or his melancholiness?
That's a good question. And I would answer that by saying that I think he collected the works that represented what he wanted to say. And I say that because he had, throughout his life, he had a series of warehouses. And there was one warehouse that he always kept that his dealers couldn't go to. And those paintings there, he felt, were the seminal works that told his story the way he wanted to tell it. Eventually that kind of got blown out of the water, but that's actually the source of a book. But in terms of the Rothko Chapel, that's a complicated entity because, of course, he died before the installation. The architecture was changed from what he originally thought it was going to be when he created the works. The way that he painted caused colors to change over time. So they've gotten a little bit darker. I mean, they were always dark. I mean, let's face it, they're dark. But they get a little darker, and some of the gradations are less noticeable as time goes by. He read a book about the techniques of the old masters, and in it they talk about not using an egg white wash because it tends to crack and doesn't have the kind of longevity with color that it should. And he knew that, but he used it anyway. You know, he knew that it was problematic, but he decided to use it anyway because he liked the effect. And so when we look at some of his paintings, they do change over time, and which is hard for someone who has such rich color. You know, when that color changes, it can be a problem in how we perceive them and how we perceive their work.
And didn't he also, I mean, he had a kind of an odd mixture, didn't he, that involved like rabbit and other things that he put in his paintings?
Right, rabbit glue and all kinds, yeah, those were all, yeah. I mean, he read this, he loved to experiment with all of these different kind of techniques and media, and he read a lot, and he got a lot of it from a book written by a Viennese artist in 1920.
We can take one more question. Yes.
This is for Joe. I'm fascinated with your Beijing connection, and I'm wondering, in the midst of sort of Oriental philosophy and so forth, has that made any difference in the way you portray this character?
Well, I think a lot of the interacting and working with Chinese theater artists, because their style of theater is much different than ours in the West, has influenced not only my work on Mark Rothko, but all of my theater work. And because if there were a generalization that could be made, our tendency in America as actors is to find emotion through the study of emotion, through something internal, whereas Eastern theater traditionally finds emotion through physical expression, so that in their very highly stylized forms, the opera forms, of which there are 400 different opera forms there, a movement of the finger or a turning of the head means I love you, I hate you, I'm very sad. So they learn that language. And it's very beautiful and it's very powerful when you begin to understand what's being expressed in that way. So one of the things that's really influenced me working there, and it's whether it's on Rothko or any other thing, is that I feel in the West that we're really losing the ability to articulate with our bodies on stage. The idea that each movement that we make has a purpose, and the purpose is the same purpose as our spoken language, which is to express what the playwright has written. So the Chinese actors and directors have really helped me to incorporate that in a sort of Western style. So my long rambling answer is yes, it has had some effect. I could have just said yes, I'm sorry.
You know, I want to take this opportunity. You know, the Rothko exhibit at the Art Center opens today and runs through February 9th. Red opens at the Rep tonight and runs through November 10. You can visit either the Art Center website or the Rep website to learn all about the special collaborative activities we've got going on over the next 3 weeks during the run of Red. I certainly hope you and your friends will come down and see the production and let us know what you think and join us for the conversations afterwards. I appreciate the time that Todd has taken today in his very busy schedule to come and talk to us and join us, and also Joe and Chris as they get ready for opening night. And in particular, thank you to the Clinton School, to Skip and Nikolai for making this ongoing residency and conversation part of the Rep's identity in our community. Our partnerships with our community are a defining characteristic of our theater, and certainly our partnership with the Clinton School is central to that identity. And so we thank the Clinton School for allowing us to be here today, and especially we thank you for joining us today. Come see Red, come see the exhibit. Thank you.